This is the Team Sidelined podcast, a podcast launched to support the mental game of student athletes during these extraordinary times of COVID-19's impact on life and sport. Brought to you by Sidelined USA. We invite athletes, performance coaches, and resource experts to discuss coping skills, strategies, and mindset work, which have proven to help sidelined athletes face their adversity, build resilience, and forge forward even stronger. And now, here's our host, Executive Director of Sidelined USA, Christine Pinalto.
Athletes pride themselves on pushing their mental game to perform their best physically. But it's fair to say that the mental game has taken on a whole new meaning during the pandemic. This going back and forth between hopefulness and discouragement is exhausting. Athlete mindset work that worked in the past may not be working right now, and that's understandable. This is an extraordinary time. There's prolonged periods of waiting, of stress, of hearing different reports from different governing bodies. It's tough. Sometimes it can feel like there's not a lot we can do to keep negative thoughts from popping into our heads and maybe even hijacking our emotions and our motivation. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about some strategies to help athletes build mental vigilance and manage control of thoughts and emotions during this time of COVID's impact on life and sport. Our guests today have a ton of really helpful insights to share. I'm really excited about this one. It really has the power to help us elevate our mental game and give us some new tools to work with. I hope it leads to really great discussions amongst your teammates. Let's go ahead and get started.
And now, Game 2, Managing Negative and Self-Defeating Thoughts, featuring mental performance coach Matt Brown and athlete after huddle with former Green Bay Packers running back Johnathan Franklin. Neither Sidelined USA nor its affiliates provide clinical or medical care of any kind via their relationship with Sidelined. At no time should a user have an expectation of clinical care or professional services offered or rendered.
Hey, Matt Brown, glad to have you again. Matt Brown is a mental coach for Edge School for athletes in Canada, and he's also the mental performance coach for the Calgary Flames. Matt, thanks for being here today. Tackle another issue. Yeah. So today we're talking about the mental game. We're talking about the thought life, negative and self-defeating thoughts. There's a lot going on in sports right now. It's affecting athletes in different ways. What are you seeing out there with the mental game when it comes to just, I guess, even managing the thoughts of as we're proceeding into trying to have hope here, trying to think positively? What are you seeing from athletes?
Well, I think the big challenge right now is people don't necessarily recognize the kinds of thoughts that are harmful. For instance, one of the words that gets us into trouble is should. You'll hear things like, "Well, we should have played half a season by now," or I should be 3 games into a season where I'm really solidifying myself for the draft, or it's all like this, or I should be getting more out of my workouts, and every time we say that, we lose more energy, right? We create more frustration because it's usually based on a perceived failure or injustice in some way. So if you can catch yourself saying should, and then kind of replace it with, but it is what it is. I just have to function in this situation because I can't change. That can save a lot of frustration, a lot of anxiety, a lot of sadness, a lot of shame.
It makes a lot of sense if you think about expectations and the role of expectations in just personal satisfaction. So what's my expectation, and maybe adjusting some of those expectations, which speaks to some of the things we talked about last time about like lowering the bar a little bit of expectations because of the tremendous difficulties in the landscape right now. It's not a bad thing to adjust expectations. It's not you being weak or not as competitive. It's actually really, like you said earlier, preserving that energy and really trying to give yourself the best shot for being productive in your goals.
Yeah, and another big one right now it is because anxiety is spiking, and just that sense of loss of control. It's like such a prominent feature for everyone, including athletes. And so um, the thought that can go through your head that can take you from a 6 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10 is, I can't handle this. I can't take this anymore. Because as soon as you say it and you believe it, like it evokes this just profound sense of stress, and that it can result in panic attacks and even thoughts of self-harm and those like really big episodes. And so instead of maybe having the bar too high and saying like, no, I can handle this, I got this, which is kind of what they're trained to do, try and go the opposite way and give themselves that pep talk. You might get a little more traction by saying like, wow, this is uncomfortable. What that does is it gives you permission to feel the emotions that go with that stress without labeling it as something that you can't get through. Mm. There's the difference between saying, I'm like, this is so uncomfortable for me right now, which allows me to cry, which allows me to be more forgiving if I'm not right at the top of my form, which allows me to talk it out with someone. Whereas the other, like, I can't handle this anymore. And where does that leave you? Mm. It's just like now I'm a 10 out of 10, and of course I'm going to have the kind of symptoms that go with that anxiety that that end up feeling just so excruciating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of the mindfulness and like sitting with the pain and honoring the pain, or it's not pain, but it's the pain points, right? It's the difficulties and not just rushing to fixing it. Eventually, after that kind of sitting in the pain and honoring that and sitting in the uncomfortable and just saying, yes, this is hard, and maybe leaning into some self-compassion. Of course, we need some tools to help dig us out of those spaces. There's this quote, it's by Norman Vincent Peale. It says, change your thoughts and change your world. Like you mentioned earlier, it's like putting pressure on ourselves to just think positive, for example. Without really building the tools to help get us there, can be double damage, in the sense that I was already feeling bad, and now I'm feeling bad about not being able to make myself feel positive. So now I just feel like a loser, but a sad loser. It's like there's just it's a compiling effect of almost feeling guilty. So what are some like foundational things? You mentioned some of the things to avoid. What are some foundational things as we're just starting off thinking about managing those negative thoughts, those self-defeating thoughts?
Yeah. I think just finding, like you said, that balance between, those affirming, I can do this, I got this, just give what I've got to give today, and allowing ourselves to feel what we need to feel, like giving license to those emotions. So sometimes you will need to be sad, and sometimes you will need to just like look straight in the eyes of this situation that's just taking it out of you, and just let that emotion pass through you. But you don't want to get stuck there either. So it's kind of that, kind of reaching that point where, okay, I've allowed myself to feel this. Now, forward motion, go out and do something, get outside, FaceTime a friend, get a workout in, and it doesn't have to be a perfect workout. It's just forward motion. I was actually part of this seminar years ago now, but the keynote speaker, his name was Jerry. He was terminally ill, and the theme of the seminar was like, live like you're dying, live with purpose, harvesting moments, and he was talking about his wife and how instrumental she had been, is just in his ability to cope, and someone said, because she probably gives you, that permission, that license to feel, to cry it out, to grieve, the fact that this is coming inevitably. And he said, yeah, like big time. She's been so big that way. But what might be the most important thing that she does for me is when I'm kind of trapped in that distress and I'm letting it out, and she's holding me and giving me a hug, she can sense that moment, because there's a moment where you're kind of almost all cried out, and she'd be like, okay, which says, okay, like you've gotten it out, great, needed to do that. Now let's go do something together. Let's go for a walk. Let's go, with the dog. Let's go see some friends. So it's that, sensing when you've had a release, and then back to positive. And it's simpler than it is easy. But but if you're mindful of those two things, I need to feel, but I also need more emotion. I also need to do enough things to give me some energy back and make me feel a sense of kind of purpose and optimism in order to keep from just like spiraling down into a place that I can't dig out of.
Sure. Sometimes in our minds, we can go down trails that we don't necessarily need to go down because we're trying to predict the future. We're trying to plan things out, create a game plan. I mean, a lot of athletes, that's what it's all about. It's about like knowing where you want to go and knowing the path to get there, like by backtracking that, and then starting with day one and then building and building and building. And if that's the normal trajectory that gets us to meet our goals, but right now we don't really know what the backtracking steps look like. What are some of the questions that we can ask ourselves? Getting a pulse on, are my thoughts, first of all, are they serving me well? Second of all, you're like, are they true? But like, what are some of the other kinds of things that we can be thinking about to evaluate our thoughts?
So that's one of the real challenges of the whole COVID situation, is a lot of the thoughts that go through our head that are negative and take away our kind of hope and optimism, they're true. Like you said,
right.
the process of saying, like, ask yourself, is this a rational thought? And because as soon as you identify it, like, no, that's not rational or true, then those ones are a lot easier to kind of, blow out of the water, right? Right now, if the thoughts going through your head is like, just this sucks and we can't play and this is my draft year and I'm so like bored and frustrated and like it's, check, like all those things are true. So then, our attempts to then try to refute it, like, are going to fall on their faces because it just, it's hard to refute a thought that is true. And in that case, I think maybe one of the best strategies we can have is to turn to action. Like if you can't convince yourself that one of those negative thoughts is true, then you can turn your attention to something that you can do that's going to make you feel a bit better. One of my colleagues, Derek Robinson, he has an expression that's a really good one. He said, sometimes it's easier to act your way to a better way of thinking than it is to think your way to a better way of acting. Like traditionally, when we think of self-talk, we're like shepherd your thoughts and make sure it's like a lot of positive and enabling and confidence building things, and that's going to help you to go to perform. We're going to go run some hills, and as I'm doing that, I'll feel kind of strong and explosive and purposeful and like that burn, like that you feel when you're transforming your body, and then that's going to make it a lot easier to kind of find positives and feel better and generate more positive emotions. So when you're trapped right now with negative thoughts that are true, I think just turning to action. What can I do that can turn my affect enough to just function better? It's probably going to be a strategy that has more power.
Sure. Yeah, that reminds me of something I've heard you say earlier where you said, what do I want to feel? And then like building the activities that would help get to that emotion, as opposed to planning your activities based on how you feel. It's the same concept of getting busy doing something, and that may involve a shift. If you're one of the athletes who already, if you're a senior athlete and your season has already been canceled, there's nothing you can do about that. There's going to have to be a shift that takes place in order to get back to those feelings that you want to feel, because the path towards those feelings has changed.
I think, especially with the current context where there are a lot of athletes whose seasons have been taken away. First of all, like just that, it draws into focus the importance of the grieving process. You can't skip that step. But then once you're there, make sure that you're not what we call catastrophizing. A lot of these teams, they're still training together. They're still together. They're still working. They're still in the weight room. They're still doing these things. And you say, okay, like some of the best parts of being, being a high school or collegiate athlete is the bonds with my teammates. Another thing is it's the pushing and trying to get better every day. Another part is just just doing your sport, and it doesn't have to be against an opposing team. Like you go and you practice and you're scrimmaging and you're doing those things. Like it's not as good as like having the whole package, but it's pretty darn close. But if you convince yourself that like if I can't have that, then I don't want anything else is just gonna absolutely suck. Then it's an all or nothing proposition where right now that means nothing. Right. And so just recognizing that hey, I can still have most of what makes me tick, and if I keep should out of the equation and I don't spend too much time thinking about what it would normally be, then I'm going to be getting a lot of what I need.
So what about those athletes who maybe they aren't present with their teams, and maybe, I know there's a lot of D2, D3 colleges who just had to totally cancel fall sports. So there's a lot of sports that are affected by that. And maybe they're on campus, maybe they're not even on campus. So they don't have the ability to be with their teams at all. Like, what kind of hope do you offer them in identifying, the negative thoughts, which, like you said, are very real? Like, you missed out and everybody missed out, and that was a super unfortunate situation. What do they turn their thoughts towards?
Yeah, again, it's giving yourself permission to feel what you need to feel. Maybe every day or every week, where you just need to feel it, and let it, like you say, pass through you and sink into you. But then it's again, what can I do that gives me those things that I'm missing? So that feeling of kind of more emotion and getting better and living in my body. There's a lot that you can be doing remotely. We're becoming masters of basement workouts. Like, there's a lot of videos and a lot of resources, and most places have strength conditioning people that can kind of guide you through getting a lot out of, without having a lot of equipment or other people there. So like embrace those things, because it's less about what what you're doing for your workout than what your workout's doing for you. So the other thing is, if we're wearing masks and we're socially distanced, especially if we're outside, you can be in the same physical space, as people that you like and connect with and care about. So, so getting out and being with like 2 or 3 friends, everyone brings their dog and you walk together. You're following all the rules. You're doing it safely. It's not the same as being with your team, but it's not that far off in terms of just that human connection, which probably we haven't talked about as much as we ought to, because that's one of the biggest things that that makes athletes tick. Like even in individual sports, your training group is so much a part of your life. You gain so much energy from that dynamic. But finding those people in that kind of corner of the world, wherever you're kind of stuck right now because you can't be at your at your school with your team, and it's building it for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I would imagine that there's opportunities there to like play out some of the character qualities that you have as an athlete. Like you consider yourself a leader on the court or the field. Well, you be the one to instigate those, get-togethers or whatever. I know it's very easy for teens to just retreat and sit back and just, because, like, again, where you're talking earlier about, because we can't have what we want to have and life looks very different, well, I'm just going to kind of ride it out back in the backstage here and just get through. But if we can think about it differently, if we can encourage those same athletes to say, hey, if I was a leader on the court, I was a leader on the field, why shouldn't I be a leader in my, social group, and to make these things happen and find out, like, can we plan a ski trip? Skiing is probably a pretty safe sport, or can we plan something fun that we can be doing and take leadership in that? Is there any other transfer that you can think of like an athlete's personality that can help them, like maybe transferring that to a different capacity where they can put their efforts towards something purposeful, like we talked about earlier?
Right. And actually, the athlete guests that you had on the previous podcast, I think they both made some mention of the fact that, when you're missing time, whether it's because of injury or because of COVID, it's also a good time, to just ask, like, what other purpose do I have? What other qualities are in me? And how can I experience those in other ways? And you and I have had enough of a conversation about, like every athlete that identifies as an athlete and pours himself into their sport, being a high performance athlete, you are headed for a crisis. And it could come tomorrow, or it could come in 10 years. But at some point, you'll be faced with the fact that sport, you can't do it anymore, not at that level. And that experience, guts a lot of people, because they feel like, I don't even know who I am without this, or worse yet, I know that I'm nobody without this. So like everyone's kind of headed ultimately to be face to face, with that kind of dark question of, do I have value outside of my sport? And so this is actually a great opportunity to say, okay, at some point I'm going to be done with this. Right now it's largely taken away from me. Maybe I can start to kind of figure out, what there is to me outside of my sport, and they're like, man, there's a lot of community need right now, and I think trying to think of the name of the male athlete that was on, what's his name?
Matthew Harris.
Right. Okay.
Northwestern.
And he just found purpose in serving his community. Well, like, our communities are on the ropes right now.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do it safely, but our communities need the likes of Matthew, like strong role models that that are willing to reach out and spend time and give of themselves. And so looking for opportunities, to give and to tap into a part of yourself that's, compassionate and generous and, empathetic. Man, like what a perfect time to expand your sense of who you are. And then on the other side of that, like when we get back to another kind of, level of normalcy that looks familiar to us, then all of a sudden you have more perspective when you're playing your sport. You're better able to handle a bad day on the field, on the ice, on the on the course, on the court, because there's more to you. So it's going to enhance your recovery. So asking the question now, like, what else is there to me? It's gonna make you more sane right now. It's gonna probably serve you and the people around you really well, but it's also going to make you better when you're back full bore into your sport. So there's no downside to devoting some time and attention, and effort to broadening, to expanding that sense of self.
Yeah, I think that's really impactful. Like you said, there's no downside, because at some point every athlete's going to have to hang up their cleats at some point. What kinds of interests can you explore, even just a little bit right now? Or maybe it's something as simple as, there's a kid down the street that plays the same sport as you, and, maybe they would love, they probably love you as the cool teenager or the cool college student back from home. to invest in them and give them 30 minutes, little, practice and throw a ball with them or whatever, and invest in something as simple as a neighbor kid, or maybe there's something that you can be doing, just pursuing a passion of yours that maybe it's just an ounce of interest right now. You don't really know because you've never really had the time to explore it. Maybe now is the time to explore that. But just even like anything to direct our energies toward something other than sitting, feeling cruddy. Anything more on that?
Yeah, I think when you look at like high school and collegiate athletes and pro athletes, it's easy right now because so much has been taken away from them. It's easy to get kind of stuck in that sort of, oh poor me mode. But remembering that they're middle school and elementary school kids and like preschool kids that are all dealing with their own kind of loss and kind of assault on their normal, and just seeing that here's an opportunity to help others that are in a similar kind of distress. Like we've had a couple of the Flames players have done these Zoom calls with some of our bantam teams, and you're talking about 13, 14-year-old kids that have the attention span of a fruit fly, and they're like for 30 minutes just hanging on every word of a Dylan Dubé that plays in the NHL, and so like they just whether it feels like it or not, you have so much to give, because whether you choose to be or not, you're a role model, and I remember Charles Barkley saying, I didn't choose to be a role model. It's like, no, like you're thrust into it. It is what it is, and you can either use that positively or you can recoil from it. So and it's how we feel is a direct result of what we're paying attention to.
That's good. How we feel is directly related to what we pay attention to. Did I get that right?
Yeah. So and right now, because the whole COVID thing is like this moving target. So there are always updates, and so like every day you're hearing something more, and most of it's bad news. And so so our attention is just focused on more bad news, more bad news, more bad news. So of course that's going to shape our emotional profile. But as soon as you start looking at young kids that you can be supporting or interacting with or giving back to, as soon as you start to say, okay, this has been taken away, but I've actually had more time with my family, which has been great, and I've been outside more than I would ordinarily be, and I'm reading more, just that kind of that. Even people talk about a gratitude journal, just writing down like what are the positives in my life, what are the blessings that I have, and as soon as that's what I'm paying attention to, then how I feel is going to shift, anywhere from a little bit to profoundly. But so it goes back to what you said about shape your thoughts and shape your life. If you're deliberate about paying enough attention to the positives, you're going to experience this phase in our lives quite differently.
Very true. Matt, this has been great. So just to kind of wrap up, the things that we've talked about are, first of all, acknowledging what's going on in your head and sitting in with those emotions, giving yourself permission to just acknowledge them and let them be real. And then getting about doing something, challenging those thoughts, certainly where you can, where those thoughts are true, then it's just time to get controlling what you can control and get, distracted by doing something on a different vein. We talked about the role of gratitude and, try to celebrate the wins, even if they're small. Try to celebrate the past wins. If you had a tremendous experience in your last season or something and you didn't get it this season, well, we go back and, reflect on those times and be grateful for them. We talked about shifting our attention towards something else, that's something of purpose or just something in our communities, some part of ourselves that we haven't had a chance to really explore, and just being vigilant about not sitting on the sidelines. Those are all incredible thoughts. Thank you so much for helping us kind of really think through how to start to tackle some of these things, because I think some of the easy adages of just be positive can only take us so far. Sometimes we have to really dig in and do some mental work. So thanks for investing in us today and for sharing your thoughts. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess if I would close with one thing, it would be that, athletes, you're always pushing like the edges of like just always try and get a little bit more out of yourself and try and get as close as you can to peak performance. And you're balancing that with trying to stay healthy. And I think just right now, given the current circumstances, we're just a lot closer to unhealthy than we would normally be. And so maybe as we shepherd our thoughts, the more important priority right now should be like, how should I be thinking that allows me to stay just, mentally okay, or recover to okay when I feel like I've slipped out of it. I think that's more than how can I push the envelope right now is how can I kind of keep it on the rails and stay healthy enough to even just function. And everyone's in that same sort of boat. But if all of us are saying like right now, health is more important than anything else, then I think that's going to inform that process of how we talk to ourselves, how we talk to each other.
That's really helpful. The after huddle that we're going to be doing next is jumping to former NFL player Johnathan Franklin. He, in his rookie season with the Green Bay Packers, he ended up getting a neck injury that ended his football. Jonathan's got some really incredible things to say. I know he's going to enjoy listening to this conversation and building off of that and explaining really kind of what as an athlete, like what that can look like and what that looked like for him, and just the excitement that it's brought to his life to learn how to transform his thoughts after kind of honoring the difficulty and moving forward. So that's next.
Yeah, thanks. I look forward to hearing what he has to say.
Thanks for providing great content to talk about.
Great. Thanks, Christine.
All right, Johnathan, welcome. Thanks so much for being here with us and for sharing your experience. Like I mentioned, everyone knows a little bit the basics that you had a career-ending injury. Can you tell us a little bit about how your football career ended up being sidelined?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here. But after graduating from UCLA, I was drafted by the Green Bay Packers playing running back. And I had the vision, the expectation, and the hope that I'll be in the NFL for years to come. So upon my rookie season, my first year in the NFL, we were playing the Minnesota Vikings, 12th game of the season. First play of the game, first quarter. I was returning a kick, running with the ball, hit on the crown of my helmet, fumbled the ball. Looking at the ball on the ground, understanding I needed to pick it up, I attempted to reach out. Little did I know I was completely paralyzed from my neck down, couldn't move an inch. After a few moments go by, I got my feelings throughout my body, slowly able to get up. While walking to the locker room, took a look back on Lambeau Field. Little did I know, that'll be my last time ever looking back as an NFL player, as an athlete officially. I was forced to medically retire due to a spinal contusion in my C2 zone. For if I would have ever been hit again, I'll be paralyzed for the rest of my life. So I was sidelined and still am. I'm just 22 years old. My hopes, my dreams of football was taken away from that play.
Yeah. Extremely rough situation, obviously. Far more serious in many ways than what we're talking about right now with the pandemic. I mean, that was life-threatening. But at the same time, you're a great person to talk to. You and I have talked before, and you did a lot of mental work inside to work through all of the after kind of psychological impact of having to say goodbye to your sport and not get out of your sport what you really wanted to complete. And there's a lot of athletes who can relate to that right now, or they're dealing with that fear of having to potentially deal with that if they're a senior and they're not sure if they're going to get their season this year. If there's postponements, there's certainly this element of a stop and go. And One of the things that Matt Brown and I talked about offline was this oscillation between hope and despair, and about how emotionally fatiguing that is. And so many athletes are going through that in different capacities. Some have had their sports programs dropped and are trying to find a way to play for maybe a different school, or just having to let it go. Do you relate to that oscillation between hope and despair when you were sidelined and kind of trying to figure out if that was truly the case? I know for a while you were hopeful that another doctor would clear you. What was your hope and despair cycle like?
No, 100%. I can completely agree because, after I was injured, I went to go visit a set number of doctors, actually three in total in different states, with the hope that I would play again. And, the first doctor gave me the news that I would never play in the NFL again. And again, my pride, my hope, I overlooked that, right? This has to be a test to make me stronger. The second, the third doctor, similar words, you'll never play the game of football again. And again, it crushed me, and still although they were communicating that to me, I didn't really connect with the truth, right? That was presented. Emotionally nor mentally, I ignored it, and still with the hope that I would come back. Even those around me would share like, "Hey, you can come back. This is just a test. Or pray through it, right? You'll be healed." So didn't really truly connect with the reality of that. And then when I returned back to Green Bay, when they essentially didn't clear me to come back on the team and release me, then the reality set in that I'll never play a game of football again.
Yeah, and Matt talked about those feelings, should have this, and this should be my, comeback story, or this should be whatever, fill in the blank. He talked about that I can't handle this. Like, I can't imagine this being the reality. Did you feel those feelings too?
Absolutely. I was depressed. I was lost. For me, I started playing football at 10 years old, growing up in an underserved community where at the time I connected with football with not just a sport and a game, but it was my identity, my purpose. It opened a door. It was the bridge to furthering my education. So when you look at football, for me, it was more than just the game. It was everything. It brought my friends into my life, right? Allowed me to be a hope and inspiration for my family. And you take this away, you can imagine the thoughts that went in my head, right? I should be playing. I need to be playing, right? I'm not good enough. Who am I now? You have this identity crisis, this shift in perspective now of this game of football, and even how I saw myself when I looked in the mirror. So there was a streamline of negative thoughts, of discouragement, of just being confused.
I think athletes relate to that quite a bit, with that sense of confusion, because there's no clear answers right now. We just know that it's impacting, and the clear answer is whatever the answer is today. And there's this hope of, maybe tomorrow it changing, or contending with a different reality. Maybe there's a way. So I think a lot of athletes, as this has gone on for a long time, have displaced those feelings. It's like easy to push those aside and just like get to your workouts and keep grinding and being hopeful. And that's like obviously a great thing, but at some point the feelings, I think, catch up with us and we have to deal with them. So when the feelings caught up with you, where you felt like you had made at that tipping point of understanding, your reality, how did you begin to tackle some of those really self-defeating thoughts and those emotions that were at play?
Right. This is so true. And I love what Matt said, just being able to identify those emotions, right? Embrace them. And for me, growing up, the tough part in my childhood or within my community, you're taught to not deal with emotions, to ignore what you feel, to ignore pain. That vulnerability is weakness, right? That showing that you're struggling is weakness. And here I am throughout my entire life at 22, 23 years old, when I've been taught, that has been ingrained in me to not connect with the emotions. Even being on a team, being a leader, you want to be the strongest one in all moments. You want to persevere. So at this point in my life, I'm feeling depressed. I'm lost, I'm emotionally hurting, I'm crying every night, but still not connecting with the emotional discomfort and the reality of where I'm at, or hiding the pain that's going on inside, from everybody, even from myself at times, right? Although I was going through it, I didn't necessarily connect with it. And it came a point in my life where I was just unhappy. I was chasing so many things to fill me up, but it was unfulfilling. And I realized that I was just going down an empty path of just losing myself even more beyond just losing a game of football, and had the reality and just someone in my life to call me out and say, just take some time and reflect and understand who you are. And really just paused and really cried and connected with those tears, connected with those emotions that I am sad and I'm hurt right now. And I don't have a clue who I am or what I'm about to do with my life. And I think that was the point of just identifying those emotions for the first time in my life. Hey, I'm identifying that I'm hurt and what this is. And I'm embracing that I'm feeling these things and I'm going to be at this place. Although it's uncomfortable, I'm going to be here. And I'm not going to find comfort forever, but I have to feel and I have to go through these moments and I have to find a way to arise and overcome. But before I overcome, I have to feel and go through.
Right. And Matt talked about that, kind of giving yourself permission to feel what you need to feel and to just sit with the pain and not be so quick to stuff those feelings, particularly as one who has normally tried to, you work through the pain and you push it down and you dig deep, and a lot of athletes playing through injuries or, pain to recover from an injury. And so it is one of those things that's kind of harder to do. But I love what he said about letting the emotions pass through you. Like, I think one of the things we forget is that emotions are not permanent. They're transitory and they can pass through us, and we can sit in them and we can trust that it's not going to feel like that forever. Like, today is a day you're really feeling it. Okay, that's a day you're really feeling it, and lean into that. And I think what he said was acknowledging that it's like, this is hard. Just the simple acknowledgement. This is hard. This is uncomfortable. And I think so many times the second we feel uncomfortable, it's like, change gears. Like, I am not dealing with this. So that leaning into even that uncomfortability and labeling it and being okay with that.
It's finding the comfort in the uncomfort, right? When we look around, even so in society, it's about being strong, right? Or having X amount of, all these things. It's not showing vulnerability. It's being the toughest and the strongest, and giving yourself permission to feel. Going through pain is opposite of what we see every day, what we hear, of just being okay to be uncomfortable. That is not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of, hey, I will never overcome this moment. I just have to have permission just to feel and know eventually this would subside. So it is, can be difficult to give yourself permission because we're not taught how to, all right? And it's sometimes not accepted, right? Or not shown. So although it is uncomfortable even to give yourself permission, and then in the midst of that permission feeling, right? Those two things in itself is a process and steps. It's extremely beneficial and necessary.
Very good. Like nicely said, just it's a process. And so giving yourself that permission to be okay with being in process and to work it through. And it may be a looping effect. It may, there may be time when you start to feel better and more hopeful, and then something changes, and you're back at the same point of really discouragement. And then if you do that often enough, it can start to drain you, where you start beating yourself up over, like, why can't I get over this, or why can't I make traction? And the reality is, it is what it is, and you can still make traction, but there's no benefit to beating yourself up over being human. You're human. It's okay. I'm curious, Matt talked about harvesting moments and really like living life to the fullest. Let's say today is all you've got. Like, what would you do today? And really using that to motivate yourself to get going with a sense of purpose. How did a sense of purpose help you in your kind of working through those feelings and thinkings and get you to purposeful action and understanding what was next for you even in your career?
Right. I think it was one addressing and thinking through and visualizing, like, I don't feel like I have a purpose right now. It was the reality of taking those moments and managing this moment and realize where I'm at. And when I was able to realize that I feel like that I'm in a position in my life where I lost my purpose and I don't know where my purpose is, allowed me to think through what was next. And for me, it was really creating a vision board and re-identifying who I was after me just completely losing sight of myself, of everything. I completely recreated myself for the first time when I was 22, 23 years old, which is insane. But I wrote down everything I wanted to be and who I wanted to become and how I wanted to feel, from just being happy, even how I saw myself. Like, it was a vision board, and I was like, you're happy, you're handsome. I wrote down the things that I cared about the most: community, family, etc. And every day I just made a choice. I love Aristotle. I believe he said, we are what we repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence is not an act, but a habit. If you think about it, habits starts with choices that we make every day. Therefore, if my choice turns into a habit and my habit dictates who I become, then I can control where I'm at tomorrow based off the choices I make today. So understanding that if I make these choices that aligns with my vision, I can create new habits, which ultimately can create a new version of Johnathan Franklin, which is now working to become the best version of me. So we all have the power of choice to become who we want, no matter where we have been in our lives. And for me, it was really looking at things on paper and knowing I have the power of choice to change where I'm at today, regardless of how long that might take.
Right. I can see that being a really helpful exercise for athletes, whether or not it's a temporary sideline situation. And we're just talking about create a vision for this year. In this season where everything's up and down and we don't know really from one day to the next if there's going to be sports or not, or shutdowns, or if COVID's going to have this tremendous wave in the winter, like a lot of people fear, and shut everything down, even though I'm currently playing. Having this vision and creating some time to think through what do you want out of this year and not, wasting the year. It's just so easy to think of it as outside of our control. And so much of it is outside of our control, but really leaning into what is a part of our control. And that is forward thinking and thinking through what it is that we want to get out of this year. And maybe that's, like Matt mentioned, exploring a part of you that you haven't had a chance to explore yet because you've been so devoted to your sport. Maybe there's parts of your personality that you just haven't really been able to cultivate. Tell me a little bit more about your experience in making a shift towards exploring other parts of you besides football.
Right. And what I wouldn't say beauty, but what a unique opportunity for the high school student athletes, college student athletes, to really be in these moments of isolation and, to your point, reflect on what's next, or even how they feel in these moments, to prepare them, even if they return or if life sends them a different direction. This is the moment to prepare for what's next, to identify where you're at and who you are, which is extremely uncomfortable, but so necessary with life. But for me, I'm so grateful. Obviously, I would have loved to play football for years to come. I would have loved to still be playing today. Football was such an amazing game. It is an amazing game for me. But the worst moment, as I look back, has absolutely been the best thing for me that has happened. And the worst moment in my life thus far was losing the game of football, losing my identity, losing my purpose, as I thought at that time, because I really was able to look in the mirror. And now I'm able to look in the mirror and I know the person I'm looking at. right? And it doesn't have to, it's not dictated by my family, my friends, not my performance, how people acknowledge me, but by me laying the foundation of my life and building that based off my vision. And from that, and because of that, I know I'm enough, regardless if sports is in my life or not. So I've understood my strengths, my areas of growth. I'm actually funny sometimes, you know. It wasn't just because I was a good football player. People actually laugh at my jokes, but it's so many things that I was really able to discover about me by spending time with me, learning me for the first time when I lost the game.
Yeah, that is awesome. Okay, so this idea of expanding your sense of who you are, that can be kind of challenging, especially in the beginning, because athlete sport is what they've known. And usually they've specialized to a point where it's all they've known. So when an athlete starts to look at other things and try out other things, and you're comparing to how great you became over time in your sport, it may feel like you're not making much traction. You're not very good. Start writing poetry or something. And maybe you feel like your first few attempts really stink. But I think it's important for athletes to understand whatever it is you choose to build on the side or next, what have you, it's going to take time to build, just like your athletic career took time to build. And so you have to remember you're starting from scratch. Potentially, maybe you have a little bit of experience, but as you start some new things, you're going to not necessarily be the best at it. And the part of it that's exciting and that's encouraging is you're in process. You're beginning to try something. You're taking risks. Even if you don't end up going very far with a certain idea, you try it out and you see and you play it out. And that playing it out and trying it out and exploring new parts of you, that's how you get to where what you're saying is you really learn to understand who you are as a human and to value that. But I'm guessing that took a period of time. For you, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now that you maybe wouldn't have had the chance to explore if you'd have continued your football career.
Right. No, I appreciate what all that you shared. And I'm still learning me and finding new things about me every day. I think it's a lifetime journey of learning, which is a beauty in itself. But as I look back, it was giving myself grace, showing myself mercy and being patient with me. Many times, even as an athlete, we want instant gratification. You think about practice, for me, I break a few tackles, I get X amount of yards. I can see the success of the play. I score a touchdown. I see the success of my performance. I'm leading a team. They're following me. I can see the success of my leadership. When that's taken away, where do we find success? Where do we find progress? Where do we find growth? And outside of the game, it takes patience. We have to be patient with ourselves, right? And growth can be over time, not necessarily in the minutes and the seconds of the life that we live. And I had to learn to give myself the grace and the mercy and the patience, because I can look at myself and everyone else. I'm X amount of years old. I should be here. I should be doing this. I shouldn't be feeling this way. But when we build our foundation, then we dictate who we become and when we become. And it's okay when we arrive there, and we're competing against ourselves. And when we get to comparing, right? Comparison, I believe, is the thief of joy, the thief of happiness, the thief of peace. So it's not comparing against anyone else, but just living our lives. But for me now, I'm going on my 5th season with the Los Angeles Rams. I'm director of social justice and football development. And then also have an opportunity to lead a small church. So I preach once a month and lead Bible studies every Thursday. So kind of have dual roles in life. And what a blessing that I think losing the game had allowed me to really do what I'm learning, what I've been doing the entirety of my life. I remember I did an exercise, but I wrote down the 5 most important things of my life. And this was when I was playing football. I wrote down like football, family, etc., horseback riding, whatever. And I after writing down these 5 different topics, I wrote down, why do I enjoy them? From football, I love to lead, to bring people together. Same thing with my family, love to bring them together. I love horseback riding. It was being free, having control. And I saw that there was a consistency of the 5 most important things that I like. There was consistent things that were popping up. There was community, there was control, there was freedom. And look at it here, 6, 7 years later, I'm doing what I've been doing my entire life, right? I'm bringing communities together, right? I have the freedom to just control and create with programs, right? So I have the heart, right? The passion to just break different divides and barriers that exist, right? Among individuals beyond. So when I took time to reflect, I'm actually doing what I've been doing my entire life, but it was when football was taken away that I had opportunity to reflect and see, like, why did I do what I do? And here I am doing it still. I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I'm going to quote you. I wrote down this from our earlier interview that we did a couple years ago. You said, sometimes we're blinded by our potential because of the other things we're chasing, when really there's a bigger picture that we should be running after. You said, after you were reflecting on your talents and abilities, you said, there's a lot of those I've ignored because I thought something was for me and there really was something else bigger. So yeah, I appreciate the way that you shared that, because it can be very all-consuming when you lose the thing that's most dear to you. I mean, obviously family, of course, but at the end of the day, you know, athletes in many ways, beyond the really close personal relationships, it's their sport that they've poured everything into. And so this idea of allowing that not to define you to the point that if it was taken away, you'd be lost, but redefining yourself and using your skills and using your sense of community and leadership. A couple of things and we'll wrap it up. But one of the things I know about you is that mentorship and kind of leading people younger than you through whatever experiences that they're experiencing has been a tremendous part of kind of that transformation for yourself and getting your eyes off of your own personal woes with what you lost and moving it towards others and community. How would you speak to that, like as part of a transformational process, and what role did that have in really helping you get through some of that depression?
Right. I always taught you should always have somebody pouring in you while you're pouring into someone else. You know, that can give you a sense of balance. And really, after going through losing a game of football, my identity, it has really helped me when I speak to young men and women, and I can see myself in their shoes, right? They want to, play professionally, or this was their sense of hope, right? This is all they know. This is their identity. And they respond and live life based off their sport. And that was me. And for me, what I've embraced is the power of perspective, of how they see themselves and how they see their sport, that you can still love and have these dreams and aspirations, but shift your perspective on the bigger picture of life, and how you can truly use the platform of sports to help evolve you to being more than just an athlete, right? More than just the best player on the field. So I think that's absolutely helped me a lot in my growth and development.
I appreciate that very much. And what I love about you is, like, football did mean the world to you, and that's super relatable. You wanted to do more for your family and provide for your family. And even though that was taken away from you, and that's an extreme situation that most listeners to this podcast aren't experiencing to that level, you weren't cut off from that path. It just took a different turn. And so just remembering that life takes us through different turns, and what seems like it may not be the end of it. It may be a different path altogether, and don't be scared of that, because there's multiple ways to get where you want to get to in life. And if you're cut off from something prematurely, hey, maybe that was just the catalyst to have you explore something you otherwise wouldn't have. Johnathan, any closing thoughts you have as we're wrapping up talking to our listeners who are impacted by COVID's disruption on sport? Any last encouragements that you can offer us?
Yes, and maybe I'll just comment on what you just shared. It's important for me, and I know I shared this before, but it helps me every day of learning how to replace the lies with the truths. Having a filter system. So many times during these moments, we can tell ourselves lies, right? We can deceive ourselves as people. Again, like we're not good enough, right? We were supposed to be here. I'll never make it. Even our insecurities, right, can paint realities and paralyze us in the midst of moments. Even in my job, I can face certain things and I can tell myself lies. It's important to understand, how do you filter those out? When the lies come inside, what are you going to believe? So really identifying what are the truths about you, what are the lies that you have choose to believe, and filter out those lies and replace those with the truths. I think that will really help during these moments, right, of isolation, during the reality that you have to face. If your sport is ending, understanding what is the lie that you now believe and what are the truths that you want to live on and believe and walk on. So thanks for having me. I appreciate these moments, and that's all.
Absolutely. Thank you, Johnathan.